The sun beat down like it had a grudge that day, hot enough to make the road shimmer and the air taste like sand. In the middle of Main Street, a young woman was tied to a carpenter's table, wrists raw and skin streaked with dirt. Her dress, once white, now looked like a torn flag of shame. The crowd stood close, feeding on her humiliation. Children tossed pebbles, old men spat, and the women murmured prayers that sounded more like sentences. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Her name was Emma Hayes, only 22, and she'd been branded guilty of indecent behavior. The town's decency league lined up proud as judges, calling her a sinner, a warning, a disgrace. No one spoke for her. Not a soul dared. The sheriff's office kept its doors shut, pretending justice didn't live here anymore. The smell of sweat, pine, and fear hung heavy in the heat. Emma trembled, not from pain, but from the sound of laughter slicing through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Let her be claimed, or let her rot." The words cracked the silence like a whip. Then, through the heat haze, a man appeared at the far end of the street. He was tall, maybe in his 50s, wearing a dark coat too heavy for summer. Jack Turner, a retired lawman who'd buried both his wife and daughter years ago, walked slow and steady. He didn't come to watch. He came because something in him refused to see another soul broken in public. Somewhere behind her dirt-streaked face, he saw the ghost of his little girl, the one fever had taken long ago. Maybe that was why his boots didn't turn away. As he reached the table, Emma lifted her head, her cracked lips trembling. Her voice came out dry and desperate. "Help me. Claim me tonight." The crowd gasped. It wasn't a plea for ownership. It was a plea for life. Her last attempt to exist in a place that had already erased her. Jack looked around. Every eye dared him to keep walking, but he didn't. He reached into his coat, tossed a handful of silver coins onto the ground, and said quietly, "Her fine's paid. She's under my protection." A hush fell. The Decency League muttered in outrage, but the law allowed a man to post bond for a woman accused of moral crime. He'd settle it with the sheriff before sundown. The ropes came loose, leaving red grooves around her wrists. Emma swayed, her knees buckling, but Jack caught her shoulders, steady as a wall. They stood there for a long second, two strangers, both judged by the same crowd. Whispers crawled through the street as he led her away toward his horse. The Decency League watched with clenched jaws, uncertain if he'd saved her or damned himself. Out of town, the laughter faded, but its echo still followed them. The road was dry, the wind sharp, and the world quiet. Emma rode weakly behind him, clutching his coat with shaking hands. The lamps of Dodge disappeared behind them, swallowed by dusk. When they stopped by the river, Jack helped her down, gave her water, and half a biscuit from his saddlebag. "Rest," he said softly. "You're safe for now." "Safe?" she whispered, like she was tasting the word for the first time. She hadn't felt safe since the night Luke Carter cornered her behind the laundry shed. The night he stole not just her dignity, but her name. His father's men had come running when she screamed, but not to help. By sunrise, the Decency League had already twisted her story into sin. Jack listened in silence. His eyes stayed calm, but his jaw tightened every time she said the name Carter. The fire between them crackled, and the wind carried the smell of pine. "You believe me, don't you?" she asked, voice shaking. "I believe the look in your eyes," he said quietly. "Liars don't tremble like that." Emma gave a bitter, broken laugh. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he answered. "But I know guilt, and I know innocence when I see it." For a moment, peace found them, brief, fragile, but real. Jack handed her his blanket and turned away to tend the horses. He didn't touch her, didn't stare, and somehow that made her trust him more than anyone in years. A train whistle moaned in the distance, its light fading across the plains. Emma watched it vanish and wondered if she'd ever ride one, far from this cursed town. Jack spoke again, almost to himself. "Tomorrow, we start making things right." "How?" she asked. "By telling the truth and making the right people talk." Emma stared into the fire. The truth had never saved anyone in Dodge before, but something about this man made her think maybe Just maybe it could this time. The moon rose, pale and quiet. For the first time since her nightmare began, she closed her eyes without fear. Jack watched the embers fade and whispered to the night, "If hope can live here, maybe she can too." But deep down, neither of them knew what the town would do when the truth finally came out. Morning crept over Dodge City slow, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything. The dust never really slept there. It just settled for a few hours before rising again. Jack Turner tightened the strap on his saddle, eyes heavy from a night with too many thoughts. He left Emma Hayes at the small ranch house on the edge of town. "Keep the door locked," he told her. "Don't open it for anyone but me." She nodded, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him until he disappeared down the trail, dust kicking behind his horse. When the sound faded, the silence felt too big, the kind that made her heartbeat sound louder than the wind. Back in town, the banners of the Decency League still hung like scars outside the church. Their leader, Reverend Miles Crow, stood at the pulpit, shouting about virtue and sin, his voice rolling through the open doors like thunder. But everyone knew the truth beneath the sermon. Crow was neck-deep in debt. The League's donations kept his small bank alive, and the Carter family's money kept his house from falling apart. Preaching sin had become his trade. Jack walked past the church without slowing. He'd seen too many men hide behind words. Inside the Long Branch Saloon, the air smelled of whiskey, sweat, and stale music. The piano was off-key, and every face told a lie they didn't have the courage to hide. He found a woman folding laundry behind the counter. Martha, the one who ran the boarding house where Emma had worked. Her hands were raw from soap, and she flinched when she saw him. "I ain't looking for trouble," Jack said quietly. "Just the truth." She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door. "Truth don't come cheap in this town. I've paid enough for it already." She stared at him for a long second, then whispered, "That girl never did what they said. Luke Carter forced her. His father paid me to keep quiet." She reached into a drawer, pulled out a small ledger wrapped in cloth. "It's all in here. The payments, the dates. I kept it in case I ever grew a spine." Jack's jaw tightened. "You just did." He tipped his hat and left without another word. It took him half a day to track the next names. People in Dodge didn't talk easy, not when the Carters owned half the county. Jack bought coffee, helped fix a broken hinge, even hitched an old man's mule. Small kindnesses that loosened lips. Slowly, stories began to surface, the same story told in different voices. A Chinese laundryman said he saw Luke drag Emma behind a shed. A saloon girl with a scar under her lip said the same thing. Each voice matched the others, weaving a truth the League had tried to bury. By sundown, Jack walked back into the Long Branch, the ledger tucked under his arm. The place was thick with smoke and noise. He set the book down on the bar with a dull thud. "This," he said, voice calm but hard, "is your decency, bought and paid for." The room went still. Reverend Crow's face turned the color of rust, and Luke Carter's hand drifted to his belt. Jack's eyes didn't move from his. "You move that hand, boy," he said evenly, "and I'll show you what real sin looks like." Someone laughed nervously. Another whispered, "He's got proof." And then the murmur grew until the whole saloon buzzed with anger. Crow stumbled backward, shouting about lies, but the faces around him had already changed. No gunfire that night. No gallows either. Just truth spreading faster than bullets. By week's end, the Decency League's meetings drew more flies than followers. The mayor's wife tore down their banners herself. Crow's sermons grew shorter, his voice weaker. The town had begun to see its reflection, and it didn't like what it saw. A few days later, Emma walked into the same saloon, sunlight cutting through the windows behind her. The chatter died as she stepped forward. She didn't tremble this time. "I was never what you said I was," she said, voice steady. "But I'll be who I choose to be from now on." Some men looked away. Some women lowered their eyes. But something quiet shifted in that room, the kind of silence that feels like the start of change. Jack stood beside her, saying nothing, just letting her have that moment. For the first time, Dodge City saw the truth standing tall. Not as a sermon, not as law, but as a woman who refused to break. Justice hadn't come from a gun that day. It had come from courage, raw, human, and long overdue. The sky turned the color of bruised iron that evening, heavy with the promise of rain. The smell of wet dust drifted in on the wind, mixing with the smoke from the saloon lamps that burned low along Main Street. Jack Turner stood by the window of the small ranch house, watching the storm roll closer. He knew peace in Dodge City never lasted long, not when men like Luke Carter still had something to prove. Emma Hayes was in the corner, packing a small bundle of clothes. Her hand shook as she tied the string. "You think they'll come for us?" she asked, her voice quiet but trembling underneath. "They'll come for you," Jack said, fastening his gun belt. "But they'll have to go through me first." Thunder rolled far off in the hills. The lantern on the table flickered as if it knew something the wind hadn't told them yet. Jack moved to the door, checked the rifle by the frame, and left one lantern burning near the window, a signal for the sheriff's men he'd quietly arranged earlier that day. He'd left a note in town, for words scrawled on the back of a receipt. Arkansas Bridge. After dark. No signature, no explanation. Just a message for men who still believed the law meant something. When the first drop started to fall, he kissed Emma's forehead, brief, rough, fatherly. "Lock it behind me. Don't open for anyone." She grabbed his sleeve. "Jack, please don't." He gave a faint smile. "I've been doing this too long to stop now." Then he stepped out into the storm. By the time he reached the bridge over the Arkansas River, rain was coming down hard, hitting the planks like 1,000 tiny hammers. The river below churned brown and mean. 3 riders waited at the center of the bridge, faces shadowed, coats soaked through. Luke Carter sat in the middle, hat low, jaw tight, his father's pistol heavy in his hand. "You think you can shame me and ride off clean?" Luke shouted through the rain. Jack's voice was calm, carried by the thunder. "You did that yourself, boy. I just held up the mirror." Lightning flashed, and for a second the bridge lit up like day. Every wetboard, every trembling hand. Luke's horse snorted, restless. His men fidgeted, unsure. Then the first shot cracked. The bullet splintered a plank near Jack's boot, close enough to smell the powder. Jack didn't fire back. He raised the lantern high, its light flickering in the storm, flashing 3 times, the signal. From the trees came movement, the sound of hooves, shouts, gunmetal clattering. The sheriff's deputies burst from the dark, rain running down their faces, guns drawn. One slipped on the slick boards, his pistol hitting the planks with a sharp clang. Luke froze. His breath came out hard and fast. The rain soaked him, making him look younger, a scared boy in a man's rage. He saw the blood on Jack's sleeve where a stray bullet had grazed him, saw the unwavering barrel of the old lawman's revolver pointed right between his eyes. "Drop it," Jack said, "or the river takes you before justice does." For a heartbeat, Luke hesitated. Then his hand shook, and the gun fell into the muddy water below. The deputies moved fast. One cuffed Luke, another grabbed the ledger from Jack's coat, the proof of everything that had rotted beneath Dodge's clean words. The storm began to break, thunder fading to a dull growl. Jack leaned on the railing, breathing hard. Blood mixed with the rain and ran down into the river. The water carried it away like it always did, washing out sin, washing out truth, leaving everything quiet again. When he rode back to the ranch, the sky had turned gray, and the river glowed faintly under the dying storm. Emma was waiting by the window, the rifle still across her lap. When she saw him, she didn't ask anything. "It's done, isn't it?" she whispered. Jack nodded, too tired for words. Her smile came soft, fragile, the first real one he'd ever seen on her face. "Then maybe we can start again," she said. The wind howled once, then stilled. Rain softened to a drizzle. For a moment, it felt like the world had been washed clean. But Jack knew better. In the west, peace never stayed long. Somewhere beyond the hills, something new was waiting, something neither of them was ready for. The storm had passed by morning. What was left of it clung to the air, the smell of rain, wet soil, and ash from the lantern that had burned all night. The sky turned gold over the wheat fields, still damp and shining in the sunrise. Jack Turner sat on the porch steps, boots off, a steaming tin of coffee in his hands. For once, He wasn't thinking about the next fight or the next lie to untangle. He was just breathing. Inside, Emma Hayes moved quietly. The boards creaked under her bare feet. When she stepped outside, the early light caught her hair, still damp from washing away the dust and fear of last night. For the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't trembling. She looked young again, not the woman the town had tried to break. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, arms crossed against the cool breeze. Jack took a slow sip of coffee, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "I reckon I did," he said. "Some debts don't end with a night's work." She smiled, faint but real. "You could have walked away. Most men would have." "I tried that once," he said quietly. Didn't sit right then. Still doesn't. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy like before. It was something gentler, the kind that feels like peace sneaking in after a long fight. The ranch around them was quiet except for the wind whispering through the grass and the slow creak of the barn door. Over the next few days, the rhythm of life changed. Jack fixed the fences. Emma mended his torn sleeve from the fight. She found an old broom and started sweeping the porch like she meant to make this place hers, even if just for a little while. He didn't stop her. They spoke less than most people would have. But every small word meant something. Every glance, every silence. Trust doesn't show up all at once. It grows slow, like the green returning after a long winter. The town had quieted since the arrests. Reverend Crow's sermons had gone thin, and the Decency League had all but dissolved. People stopped whispering when Emma's name came up, and when they did, it wasn't with the same venom as before. A few even nodded when Jack rode through town, like they were finally remembering what decency really looked like. That night, the air turned warm again. Fireflies floated near the porch rail. Emma brought out 2 cups of tea, handed one to Jack, and sat beside him. The stars shimmered low, and for once, neither of them felt the weight of being watched. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked after a while. "The life before all this?" Jack thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but maybe this is the one I was supposed to find all along." She smiled, tracing her finger along the edge of her cup. "You talk like a man who's done running." He chuckled. "Maybe I am." A soft wind carried the scent of wet grass and wood smoke. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, hesitant at first, then sure. He didn't move away. The world seemed smaller right then, like it had finally stopped spinning so fast. It wasn't love, not the kind people write songs about. It was something quieter, truer, a small kind of healing born from ruin. She had been broken by lies, and he had been hollowed by loss. And somehow those cracks fit together just right. After a long silence, she whispered, "Help me. Claim me tonight." But this time, it wasn't a cry for rescue. It wasn't desperation or shame. It was trust, a way of saying she was ready to live again, to choose her own name instead of the one the town had cursed her with. Jack turned toward her, eyes soft. "Only if you claim yourself first." She let out a shaky laugh, half a sob, half a smile. "Then I guess that's where we start." They sat there until the fireflies faded, the stars melting into dawn. The scars were still there, his on the inside, hers where no one could see, but they didn't hurt the same anymore. Sometimes healing doesn't come with miracles. It comes with small choices, staying when it's easier to leave, listening when everyone else judges, believing in someone who's been forgotten. The West was still rough, cruel even, but maybe it still had a place for kindness. Maybe they both did. The days that followed felt almost borrowed, like time had given them a mercy it didn't know. The sun came up softer. The nights didn't carry the same ache they used to. But peace, Jack always knew, had a short lease in a place like this. He watched Emma Hayes move around the small kitchen that morning, barefoot, her hair tied back with a strip of linen. She hummed to herself without realizing it, a small sound that somehow filled the whole room. It was strange, hearing something that sounded like life in a place that had only known silence. Jack leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, just watching. He wasn't thinking of her as the girl he'd saved or the woman the town had ruined. She was just human again, someone trying to remember how to exist without fear. When she noticed him, she smiled, shy, like she wasn't used to being looked at without judgment. You want coffee, or just gonna stand there pretending you don't? He grinned, took the tin mug she handed him. Guess I forgot what hot coffee tastes like when it's made in peace. You mean without bullets flying? She teased. That too. They both laughed softly. It felt good, the kind of laugh that came from deep down, from a place neither of them thought they had left. For a while, they just sat there at the small table, the morning quiet except for the wind and the creak of the old rafters. Jack reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn pocket watch. The cover was dented, the chain broken at one end. Was it hers? Emma asked gently. He nodded. My daughter's. Used to wind it every night before bed. Said it helped her sleep, listening to the tick. He turned it over once in his palm, the metal catching the light. Stopped the night she did. Emma's eyes softened. You never fixed it? No, he said quietly. Some things are meant to stay stopped. Reminds me that time don't always heal, but it give you another chance if you're lucky enough to wake up. She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and covered his hand with hers, small, warm, trembling a little. Then maybe this is that chance, she said. He didn't answer. He just nodded once, his throat too tight for words. That evening, he rode into town for supplies. Dodge was different now. Quieter, like the storm that had torn through them had left something behind. The Decency League's hall was empty, its banners torn down. Even Reverend Crow had left, vanishing one night without saying a word. At the general store, people didn't whisper when Jack walked in anymore. Some even nodded, a few said morning. He didn't trust it yet, but it was something. On his way back, he saw two young girls walking together, carrying bread from the bakery. When they passed, one of them looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't much, just a small kindness, but it caught him off guard. For the first time in a long time, Jack realized the world hadn't gone entirely bad. He rode home slow, the sky bleeding orange into purple. When he reached the ranch, Emma was sitting on the porch with a blanket over her legs, the rifle leaning beside her. She looked up when she saw him and waved. He waved back, just a small motion, but it meant everything. As the evening deepened, they ate together by the fire, beans, cornbread, and silence that didn't feel lonely. The crickets sang, and the smell of the river drifted through the window. After dinner, Emma said, You know what's strange? The quiet used to scare me. Now I think it's the only thing that makes sense. Jack smiled, stirring the embers with a stick. You get used to peace the same way you get used to pain, slowly, like it's testing you first. She laughed softly. Then I hope peace is patient. He looked up at her, and for a second, their eyes met, not as rescuer and rescued, not as sinner and savior, but just two people trying to find their way out of the dark. Outside, a coyote called somewhere beyond the ridge. The stars came out one by one, slow and steady. Emma rested her chin on her knees, her eyes following the glow of the fire. Do you ever think we'll be okay? She asked quietly. Jack didn't answer right away. He watched the flames dance, thought of the bridge, the storm, the faces that had once called him a fool. Maybe okay ain't something you get, he said finally. Maybe it's something you make one day at a time. She smiled at that, a small, weary smile that carried something stronger than hope. And as the fire burned low, the night wrapped around them like a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't done being kind to them yet. The days rolled into weeks, and the ranch began to feel less like a hiding place and more like a home. The grass grew taller. The air lost that bitter chill. For a little while, they lived like people who had earned the quiet. Jack Turner repaired the roof, while Emma Hayes tended to the small garden out back. She planted tomatoes and herbs, humming to herself as she worked. Sometimes she'd stop, close her eyes, and let the wind brush against her face like she was testing what peace felt like. Jack would watch from a distance, pretending to check the fence line, though he was really just making sure the world wasn't about to take that peace away again. At night, they'd sit by the porch fire, 2 cups of coffee, a silence that didn't need filling. The world outside was still wild, but inside those walls, it was gentle. One evening, Emma found him sitting by the table, staring at a letter he hadn't opened. The envelope was damp at the corners, dirt smudged across the front. Who's it from? She asked. Sheriff, he said. He's asking if I'll come back to town for a bit. Says there's been talk. men asking questions. Emma's face tightened. About me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She set down the dish towel, her hands trembling just slightly. I thought it was over. Jack leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. Trouble doesn't die easy out here. It just rides slower. She came closer, standing beside him. You're not going back alone. He looked up at her, a faint smile cutting through his exhaustion. You think I'm going to drag you back into that place after what they did to you? Her voice broke, but her eyes didn't waver. Jack, I've been running from that town since the night it broke me. But I can't keep running forever. If I want to live, I have to walk back through the fire, not around it. He looked at her for a long moment, pride and worry warring in his face. You sure? She nodded. I'm sure. The next morning, the sun rose pale and quiet. They rode into town together, side by side. The streets weren't as crowded as before, but the air still carried whispers. A few faces turned when they passed. Some nodded. Others didn't. They stopped outside the sheriff's office. The man himself was waiting, a weathered face behind kind eyes. Jack, Miss Hayes. He tipped his hat. Heard word that Luke Carter's father's back in town. He's stirring up talk, says his boy was framed. Jack's jaw clenched. He wants revenge, not truth. The sheriff nodded. Maybe, but men like him don't stop until they get what they think they're owed. Emma stood still, her hands balled at her sides. Then we give him the truth, again, as many times as it takes. The sheriff looked at her, the same woman the whole town had once spit on, and something changed in his expression. You've got more backbone than half the men in this place, he said quietly. That afternoon, they stood in the churchyard, the same ground where she'd been humiliated months before. The Decency League sign still hung cracked on the gate, half torn by the wind. Jack leaned against the fence post while Emma stood before the small crowd that had gathered. Her voice didn't tremble this time. You all know my name. You all know what you said about me. But you never knew what happened. Not really. You heard what rich men told you to believe. I was never what you said I was. She paused, her eyes searching theirs. And if I can stand here now, it's only because one man believed I was more than your lies. The wind shifted, carrying her words across the yard. People shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared like seeing her for the first time. Jack watched from the edge, his hat low. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The truth was standing right there, taller than any sermon the Reverend ever preached. When it was over, the sheriff came forward, nodding once. You've said your piece, he told her. And I reckon that's what justice looks like around here. Not in ink, but in backbone. That night, back at the ranch, Emma sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. Her face looked tired, but not broken. Feels different now, she said quietly. Like I finally took something back. Jack handed her a cup of coffee. You did. The only thing that ever really mattered, your name. She looked up at him, eyes glimmering in the lantern light. I couldn't have done it without you. He shook his head. No, Emma. I just helped you find your voice. You did the hard part. The wind carried the smell of rain again, soft and familiar. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind. Not destruction this time, but renewal. For the first time in a long time, the night felt still, not empty. And Jack realized that sometimes redemption wasn't about saving someone else. It was about letting them save themselves. The days grew warm again, and the air around the ranch took on that lazy hum of summer, the kind that makes time slow down until you can almost hear your own heartbeat. Emma Hayes had taken to waking early, stepping out barefoot into the dew to feed the hens and hang wet laundry on the line. Jack Turner would sit on the porch with his coffee, pretending to read an old newspaper while quietly watching her move through the morning light. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. There was something about her calm now that filled every empty space between them. It wasn't the kind of peace that came easy. It was the kind that had to be earned through pain and grit. And she'd earned every second of it. Sometimes she'd catch him staring. You look like a man still waiting for a fight, she'd tease. He'd smirk faintly. Out here, peace never lasts long enough for me to get comfortable. Maybe you should try, she said. He wanted to tell her he'd forgotten how. That evening, clouds began to gather again over the hills. Not a storm, just the kind of sky that made memories stir. They were eating dinner when a single horse rode up the trail. The hooves stopped just short of the porch. Emma's hand froze around her fork. Jack stood, motionless, his eyes narrowing at the silhouette in the fading light. It was a sheriff's deputy, soaked in sweat, hat in hand. "Jack," he said, his breath catching. "There's been trouble in town." Jack's stomach tightened. "What kind?" The deputy hesitated. Luke Carter's father didn't take the arrest well. He's been talking to men, mean ones. Says you ruined his family name. He wants you gone, both of you. Says he's got friends coming down from Abilene. Emma's face drained of color. "So it's starting again." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, trouble always circles back." The deputy glanced toward the horizon. "I'll do what I can, but if I were you, I'd keep a lantern lit tonight." When the man rode off, silence filled the space he left behind. Emma stood by the table, her breath shaking. "I thought we were done with all this," she whispered. Jack walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, rough, warm. "You can't erase a man's hate, Emma, but you can outlast it." That night, the ranch felt different. The wind carried whispers through the trees. The barn door creaked every few minutes. Jack checked the rifle, made sure the horses were tied close. He didn't tell her he'd already packed a second gun under the porch steps, just in case. Inside, Emma sat by the fire, knees pulled close to her chest. Her eyes flickered with the flame. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said quietly. He sat beside her, not too close, just enough for her to feel his presence. "Then don't be. Fear's just a ghost. It only stays if you feed it." She looked at him, tears gathering in her lashes. "You talk like it's easy." He shook his head. "It ain't. But you fight it the same way you fought them, one breath at a time." A long silence followed. The only sound was the wind outside and the fire snapping. Then, softly, she said, "You ever wonder if we were meant to find each other?" Jack smiled, small and sad. "Maybe we were both just too damn tired of being alone." She laughed through her tears. "That's as close to poetry as I've heard from you." He chuckled quietly, rubbing his thumb against the edge of his coffee cup. "Don't tell anyone. Might ruin my reputation." The laughter faded, leaving something deeper behind. Not romance, not need, but recognition. They'd both been broken by the world in different ways, and somehow, those cracks fit together like they'd been waiting for each other all along. As the night stretched thin, Emma finally leaned her head on his shoulder. "If they come for us again," she whispered, "I don't care what happens. I just don't want to run anymore." Jack nodded, his voice a low rumble. "You won't have to. Not this time." They sat that way until the fire burned down to embers. Outside, coyotes cried in the distance. The wind shifted through the wheat, and a lantern on the porch burned steady, a quiet promise in the dark. Neither of them knew what morning would bring, but for the first time, neither cared. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned them. Because somewhere between pain and peace, they'd both learned something most folks never do, that being human isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to keep standing even when you have. The dawn came slow, painting the sky in soft gold and pink. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm and feels almost fragile. The wheat swayed in the breeze. The air smelled of damp earth and sun-warmed pine. And for the first time in months, Emma Hayes woke without the weight of fear pressing on her chest. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot, her dress brushing against the wood. Jack Turner was already there, sitting with his coffee, eyes on the horizon. He looked tired, but peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes when a man stops running from his past. She smiled faintly. "You didn't sleep?" He shook his head, setting his mug down. "Didn't need to. Some nights, it's enough just to see the sunrise." She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, alive. They had made it through something most people wouldn't have survived. The town's whispers had faded. The threats had dried up. Luke Carter's father had packed up and left after realizing no one cared to follow him. The Decency League was gone, its banners burned, its sermons forgotten. Dodge City had gone back to being what it always was: rough, dusty, but a little less cruel than before. Emma took a deep breath and looked out over the fields. "It's strange," she said quietly. The world feels different now, but maybe it's just me. Jack smiled. Maybe that's how the world changes, one person at a time. She nodded, eyes glistening. I used to think being strong meant surviving what they did. But maybe it means forgiving it, or at least not letting it define me anymore. He turned to her, voice low. You did more than survive, Emma. You showed them what real strength looks like. The kind that doesn't need guns or crowds. Just truth. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the wheat. Then, softly, she said, You ever think about leaving this place? Starting over somewhere else? Jack chuckled. Every damn day. But I figure I've still got fences to mend and a porch that needs fixing. She laughed. So that's your way of saying no? That's my way of saying maybe, he said, grinning. If I do go, I hope it's with someone who makes peace feel like home. Her laughter faded into a smile, warm, quiet, full of something that didn't need naming. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Then maybe you already found that. The sun climbed higher, flooding the porch with gold. The ranch, the fields, even the old fence posts. All of it seemed touched by forgiveness. Jack looked down at her, at the woman who'd walked through hell and still managed to look at the world like it might be kind again. He'd seen bravery in 1,000 forms. Men facing guns, facing death, but never anything like this. She had faced judgment, shame, and hate, and still chosen to live. He reached out, took her hand, rough meeting soft, and said, You claimed your life back, Emma. That's more than most ever do. She squeezed his fingers gently. I just stopped waiting for someone to tell me who I was. He smiled. That's the secret, isn't it? The world can break you, lie about you, even forget you, but it can't define you. Only you can do that. For a long time, neither moved. The wind rustled the leaves, a hawk circled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, the train whistle cried. Not sad this time, but free. Emma closed her eyes, letting the sound carry over her. Do you think people can really change? She asked softly. Jack thought about it, all the hurt, the loss, the dust that never quite settled. Then he said, Yeah, not all at once, but little by little, the way dawn chases off the dark. She smiled, a tear catching the sunlight as it rolled down her cheek. They sat there until the coffee went cold and the morning turned to day. There was no grand ending, no applause, no crowd, no redemption written in law books. Just two people who had found a way to breathe again in a world that once tried to choke them. And maybe that was the point, because sometimes healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about choosing to stand in the light anyway, bruised, scarred, but unashamed. The West would stay wild. People would stay flawed. But kindness, Jack thought, didn't die easy. As the wind swept through the fields, carrying the scent of a new day, Emma whispered the words that started it all. Not as a plea this time, but as a promise. Help me, claim me tonight. Jack turned to her, smiling softly. You already did. And as the sun rose higher, the dust lifted, and the world felt, just for a moment, like it had finally forgiven them both. Moral: no one is defined by the cruelty of others. Strength isn't in surviving alone. It's in choosing to keep your heart open, to forgive, and to rebuild, even when the world has given you every reason not to.